I'm pretty convinced now that there was a period of time during the 5 days in which I was conscious and experienced interactions with some of these beings, but I don't have any details to report, just vague sorts of things. But part of that time was probably in some sort of an unconscious or injured state, some sort of a coma or induced coma, or some sort of procedures involved in correcting the damage from being hit by that blast of energy. At the time, all I could remember was this short period of time. That was the reason that I thought it was still the same night. Because all I remembered was this short period of time, so that wouldn't take 5 days. There was no reason to think there was anything other than the same day, just later on the same Wednesday. I didn't know where I was. I didn't realize the danger and the fearful situation I was in at that point, but I knew something was terribly wrong with my body. I was lying on my back. I was looking up at a light over me. I thought I was in a hospital. Someone there.
I'm Whitley Strieber, and I have returned to speaking in public after many years because I have been now involved with this experience and the visitors for over 30 years, and for most of my life. And if what happened in my childhood really happened as I remember it, then for all of my life. Many people have experiences that they find very difficult and very frightening. Many people have experiences that are not that way. I've had both. I've had the worst this has to deal out, aside, I suppose, from being just outright killed, and the best. I have been in a school that has led me over 30 years to an extraordinary place, in my opinion. This place is at the edge of a bridge between our lives and the lives of what we call the dead. I've thought a lot about what their basic reality is, what the visitor's basic reality is. But then also appeared in two other forms. They used to appear as 7 globes of light floating through our woods. And in the last night I saw him, we had lost our cabin and we lost everything, because you talk too much about this stuff and people stop coming. They stop reading your books. You become a laughingstock, which is what happened to me.
I happen to be very interested in the reality question, or the ontological question as it's formally called in philosophy, and I hope to arouse and deepen your curiosity about all of this. Now, what happened to me with Bud is that somebody asked if I wanted to meet him. This was the fall of 1989, and I'd never heard of him, and they said, well, he's this guy that works with people who think they've been taken by aliens into spacecraft. And I said, he must be crazy if he believes that, and this must be some new form of psychosis. Well, I had a couple of free hours, and I went to see him, and I liked him, and he seemed sincere. He didn't seem crazy at all. And he was telling me about people who were telling stories that they didn't believe themselves, that they were questioning. They sounded like pretty healthy people, which I've seen now worked intensively with about 130 of these people, is that the stories are consistent, they are described with intense feeling, appropriate self-doubt. They are shocked when they hear other people have had the same experiences, because that tends to affirm that it's real. They have nothing to gain by this, and they don't seem to fall into any category whatsoever. And as I've gone more deeply into this, this is held up. Now, the fact that what they are describing isn't possible in our reality is not my fault. What you then have a choice of trying to stretch what you might consider to be possible.
Is this, but I think any human being in this room would have to admit that if the UFO phenomenon is occurring, as the reports suggest, it's the most important event in human history. And if that's the case, I don't think any institution or organization is being very wise to oppose the investigation, the serious investigation of such a phenomenon. The first thing is that the aliens are extraordinarily deceptive and operate in a covert manner. There is no doubt about that. There is no possible way that anyone who's looked into this phenomenon can say anything to the contrary of that, simply because we have a whole history of what we have to call screen memories, when the UFO occupants make us see things that are not there in order to hide the way they actually appear. The way the memory of the experience very, very often has been stolen from us, which is not only an act of theft, it's an act of deception, and it can't possibly really be defended so far as I'm concerned. The UFO phenomenon runs a tremendous 180-degree gamut, from being totally physical, nuts and bolts. When the thing comes down, it could break the tree branches down from the top, leave marks on the ground. People are floated out of buildings, are scarred, their bodies are marked. The craft can show up on radar, they can be photographed, etc. Totally physical. And on the other end, totally paranormal. All the communication is telepathic. The craft can be apparently unseeable at some points. We know that people can be floated through walls and they're actually missing. This is not an out-of-body experience, it's an out-of-the-house experience. The hardest thing for scientists to accept is the idea that it is both physical and so totally paranormal. The whole paradigm of what's possible.
From my own point of view, I'm going to be very disappointed if UFOs turn out to be nothing more than visitors from another planet, because I think they could be something much more interesting.
Something from another dimension of space or time?
I think what the UFO phenomenon is teaching us is that we don't understand time and space. Mm-hmm. Here are objects, I think we have to call them objects, that are physical, that interact with the environment, that cause effects on the witnesses, on the psychology and the physiology of the witnesses, and leave traces on the ground, and yet are appear to be capable of manipulating time and space in ways that go beyond what our physics understands today. Could the UFO phenomenon be manipulating us? Could it be a teaching system of some sort? Perhaps something that we are creating ourselves, perhaps a series of images that we are projecting. I think Carl Jung came very close to expressing that idea in one of his books. Or could it be manipulated purposely by people who have the technology to simulate UFO sightings? And people say, well, of course not. Who would do a thing like that? Well, I would remind you that during the Watergate investigation, it was discovered that there was a plan originated in the White House to surface a submarine off the coast of Cuba and paint the second coming of Christ over the island of Cuba using holograms. Which is well within our technology today. The idea was that since there is a large Catholic population in Cuba, they would be so upset by this vision that this would saturate the communication channels, the telephone system in Cuba, long enough for an invasion to take place.
How interesting. I'd never heard of that.
Well, I think that's a classic in psychological warfare, but that kind of manipulation is well understood, and I have personally investigated several apparently genuine UFO cases where there was in fact a manipulation. My conclusion, the conclusion of scientists working with me, was that there was in fact a manipulation taking place, and that it was not a hoax on the part of the witnesses, but a hoax on the part of somebody much better organized than...
So there are possibly all of these levels going on simultaneously.
Today, with the current technology, that would be possible. One of my interests, as you know, has been to look at ancient sightings, old sightings before World War II, for example, when there is really no confusion with modern technology. And if people described, say, in 1925 or in 1825, a disc flying through the air, then it can only have been very, very few phenomena could have produced it.
And there have been some well-documented sightings going back to the 19th century, for example.
There was, starting in 1896 and going into the spring of 1897, there was a remarkable wave of sightings of airships. Those were described as oval objects flying through the sky with lights on them. And of course, the people in those days could only compare it to dirigibles, could only compare them to airships. And those objects were capable of doing all the things that UFOs do today, including taking off very quickly and making 90-degree turns and landing and occupants coming out of them. And if nothing else, I think this is part of our folklore. This is something that we should be studying as part of our folklore.
But what is happening? That's the question. We always have answers. And if you look closely at this, you find that it has precedent throughout our history. These events have been reported in different forms. Dr. Jacque Vallée, in his groundbreaking book, Passport to Magonia, gave a brilliant look into the way this affects us over history and has affected us over history. So, is it really alien contact? We don't know. And the public doesn't like that. They don't like people to say, we don't know. They find that annoying. They want to know. They want something to either believe or disbelieve. Yes or no, keep it simple. It's not simple.